will actually start to record, and most people check it out on Spotify. We're going to start to record in 3, 2. Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. You know, I love talking to authors because they've seen some things, right? And they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a book and share with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and their destiny in the process. And if you're an entrepreneur out there, I highly recommend you write a book, the clarity that comes along with it, all of the byproducts of whether it's wealth or whether it's opportunities or whether it's freedom. It's incredible. So check out dreamstarterspublishing.com if you want to help, if you need any help in writing that book. And if you already have a book that's done, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. We can help you use that book as a marketing tool to generate leads for your business. However, to get into this show today, it's pretty exciting. I don't get to talk to these type of people too often. But this stuff fascinates me when it comes to money laundering and terrorists and how the bad guys think and what they do. Therefore, if you just see how they do things, you might be more aware of what is happening in the world. Therefore, you can protect yourself. The book that we're talking about is called Mastering Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing. And it's a compliance guide for practitioners, but the stories and the lessons can probably transcend practitioners and go to anybody who just wants to learn more about this world so they can protect themselves and just be ready and be more aware. So it is an honor to have the author with us, Tim Parkman. Thanks so much for being here, sir.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be with you.
Well, let's start off with the genesis of this book. I think you have a couple different books, but what made you want to sit down and write this book for practitioners?
Well, I wanted to try to get a good level of detail, but try to write it in an approachable way that would allow new people who worked, within law or financial services or government or NGOs who were new into these anti-financial crime roles to get the full picture. So, a lot of the detail in some textbooks just assumes prior knowledge. And then a lot of the general stuff about what money laundering is and how financial crime happens doesn't have any detail. So the brief really was to try to give some detail and some heft, if you like, but in a way that was approachable for people who'd just been appointed, to those roles in organizations. So that's what made me want to write it. And
Nice.
I hope we've achieved that with it. It's in its second edition now. So we did the first one a few years back, and then more recently this one. So that was why I wrote it.
Nice.
I would say, if I could just add, so you want to. There's two reasons why you might want to read this book, right? One is you are an auditor or a lawyer or a compliance officer or an anti-corruption officer, a CEO. You work in an NGO. You're an activist. You want to find out more about financial crime, and then I hope it'll be useful. The other use would be if you're none of those things, but you're an insomniac and you find it very difficult to get to sleep, then I would recommend that you pick it up and just before you turn the lights out, and I can guarantee you a good night's sleep. It's one of those.
Well, I will say, I think you're off on that because I dated a girl who is in this world, and she wasn't able to share a bunch of information with me. But some of the things that she was able to see in such a short amount of time is mind blowing. So I would assume maybe it will keep you up at night. Some of the things that will go on around you, and you have no idea. I mean, this goes on everywhere. You think it just happens in foreign lands and far away sea areas. No, it can happen in your backyard. You just have no idea. So, can you give us
Absolutely.
a quick little glimpse of your background, how you got into this world, where you come from, where you're at now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I used to be a lawyer. I don't know if you ever stopped being one of those, but I mean, I haven't practiced for a long time. I'm a consultant, basically, and I now run a newly launched software company called Marker, which I can tell you a bit about later on. Uh, so my background for the last 20 years has been in the field of what is called anti-financial crime. So that will cover money laundering, terrorist and proliferation financing, anti-fraud, anti-corruption, and about how the financial and trading systems of the world are used by criminals and those who act for criminals, right? The professional money launderers who do the big ticket stuff, basically to clean the money and hide the money, and enable the generators of that money, the criminals, to use it for their own personal benefit, to enjoy a good lifestyle, or on the terrorist side, to fund and finance terrorist attacks. So that's my background on it, and I would just say, because I don't know how many people in your audience will sort of be aware of these things, but the sums involved are pretty staggering. I mean, various organizations, the U.S. State Department, the IMF. I mean, there's a body called the Financial Action Task Force, which is a kind of body that promotes anti-money laundering practice around the world. Estimate it varies and obviously can't be completely accurate, but it's believed that between 1.5 to 3 trillion US dollars every year is laundered through the financial and trading systems of the world. So the sums are staggering. And just to give you an example, it's now believed that in terms of the negative effects of this activity, that currently there are more people held in what's called modern slavery around the world than at the height of the African slave trade in the 18th century.
It's
As
insane.
one example, obviously, drugs, counterfeiting, corruption is a huge one and believed to account for maybe half of the total. This is people in power in organizations and governments around the world taking or demanding bribes for concessions, for contracts, and then funneling that money back primarily to the West, to the city of London, to New York, to Singapore, to Hong Kong, to Dubai, so that it can be cleaned and they can use it to invest in luxury property, in jets, political campaigns. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So the theory is, and we've had this sort of industry that's now developed around this, which is that if you can interdict the facilitation of the criminal money, then you can help to stop the activities which generate that money. We haven't been very successful, to be honest. People have been trying this for, well, pretty much 35 years. Further back, if you go back to the US and the Bank Secrecy Act, which goes even further back, we have not done a very good job as a planet in curtailing this activity. And people are now starting to ask why that is, because a lot of money's been spent on it, but we don't really, so far as we can tell, see the benefits. And that is an issue, and I think it's a political issue that will start to become more important as we move on. What the hell are we doing?
Yeah. So take us back to your first case that you worked on. And I don't know when that was. You could probably leave out some of the details if you find that necessary, but
Yeah,
was
I
there
can
one?
tell you, I can remember it. It was actually before any of these laws had come. Certainly in the UK, I think America had had the Bank Secrecy Act for some time, but it was in the 1980s, which preceded any of our anti-money laundering here in the UK. And I was a young trainee lawyer. Believe it or not, at the time, we were called articled clerks, which is very sort of Dickensian. It's straight out of Dickens's London. So I was just a guy basically training to be a lawyer, and I had no real idea what I was doing. But I got where the company, the law firm that I worked for at the time, didn't do any criminal work. They act for a lot of banks, and one of these banks had to give some documentary evidence in a criminal case that was going on in a court in Manchester, where a local guy was being sort of had up and had been convicted of various crimes, theft and robbery and things like that. and I had to produce to turn up at court on behalf of the bank to produce the bank statements that showed that the money had come in from these crimes, etc., etc. So it wasn't really anything to do with money laundering at that time. So I went to court and I stood up, and the lawyer asked me the questions. I did yes, these are the genuine documents. They've been in custody. Here's the documents, etc., etc. He was convicted, and the sentence was so he was convicted, but the sentence in terms of what would happen to him, how long he would get, was adjourned for a later date. Okay, so, and I remember when he was convicted, he was laughing in the court. He was waving to his friends, and his family were in the gallery, and there was cheering, and it was like he really didn't think that it was going to be anything serious. And then we went back again, and he got sentenced to, I think, 4 years. So that was going to be he was going to be out in two. He was a fairly young guy. And again, there was more celebration and stuff like that. And then the prosecutor, right at the end, said, "I'd like to make an application for um, seizure of the assets." At which point the cheering stopped, and he produced evidence of a house in Manchester that he'd bought for his mother for £500,000, about $750,000, which was a big luxury property back in those days, right? I mean, a huge place. And the judge listened to the application. There were a few arguments, and he made an attachment order against the property, which basically meant that the guy's mother would have to move out the property because it
Wow.
was going to be sold. At which point he had to be restrained in court. He started attacking the guards, and had to be basically pulled back. And that made me, I mean, I was just a guy there producing documents, right? I didn't know, but it made me realize that I think, in many instances, not in all, that the time, the criminal component, the fine, the jail. If you're a hardened criminal, it kind of comes with the territory. There's an old saying, isn't there? If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. That's a risk of the trade. But when you attack the asset, the benefit which had gone to people that were in his group, that was the thing that actually made him really lose it and get angry. So it gave me an appreciation of, it's one thing to put people in jail and to have convictions and so on, but actually to go to the outcome of the crime, the luxury jet, the
Yeah.
luxury house with the pool, the lifestyle, all of that kind of hits it in the guts, really. And yeah, so I can't say from that I developed this sort of willingness, wanting to go into fighting crime, but it certainly stayed with me, and I think it's still relevant. The one of the reasons we failed so far in this fight is the amount of asset seizures is still pretty low. For all the money that's spent on trying to combat money laundering, the amount of criminal assets which are actually seized and taken back from criminals is a very, very low proportion, and that's
Wow.
something that people are trying to work hard to deal with. So that was one story. The other story I guess I could share with you, that
Yeah.
you put a real emphasis on anti money laundering, when you said it, which I think is right, because I remember I was working at the time. It was out in Asia, East Asia, and I was working in a bank at the time, and I had to go and do a training session for our local staff. It was actually I'm not even going to mention the country, right? But it was in the capital city of a country, and in a big hotel. And they had the boards outside, where you put I mean, in the old days, they used to put gold letters, on, and it would say what the name of the course was, something on team building, something on management or whatever. and ours was, and they had put on there money laundering training. And and believe it or not, so we had just started, and the police turned up, and basically some eagle-eyed member of the public had seen this and had gone to the local constabulary, and they'd turned up and basically said, well, what's going on in here? And we explained that, and we got someone to put in the word anti in front. So it's anti-money laundering training. Yeah, yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, and I'm glad you picked up on that because whenever you talk about money laundering, people are like, "Oh, I want to find out." People think that people are interested in to see how it's done to duplicate it. Anti-money laundering. I love learning about it because if you just think like a practitioner, like someone like yourself, you're able to see the possibility for fraud so much easier, right? And this is like I was saying before, like you were talking with the individual that you're saying that was a low crime figure, right? He was applying it probably in small amounts compared to maybe some government officials. Now this is happening at
Right.
an extreme degree, and this is getting extremely sophisticated. So it's not like the old days where it was all right, you get it off the streets and you have to wash it. You buy a restaurant that takes cash only, or potentially a laundromat, and then you can kind of clean it up through there, and then eventually it becomes a real business on the back end. It's becoming extremely sophisticated, and I think that the more we're able to see it, we're maybe able to spot it in the news. So when I think of FTX, Sam
Yeah.
Bankman-Fried. He created this, or they were all part of this game where they had this fake crypto, right? A lot of people invested. It got funneled out of the back and mostly into Democrat politicians' pockets, okay, into the DNC for their campaigns, which then got funneled out of there into their own pockets, making people extremely wealthy. So, to me, it's getting extremely complicated with AI and all the technology and crypto and all that, but you're able to see it from probably, I guess, from a much farther distance than the average person. So, what is an example of an extremely sophisticated setup that you have witnessed?
Yeah, I mean, so many. I think to start out with, I'd say that when you talk about money laundering specifically, you have crimes which generate criminal cash, and that can be any crime, and it needn't be cash actually. I mean, fraud, for example, which you mentioned, and crypto often will not involve cash. I mean, if you've got a sophisticated fraud scam, it's basically, invest with me. You're going to make a 15% return year on year, close your eyes and open the mouth. I mean, those kind of scams have been going on ever since, Ugg sold Og the magic stone of fire right back in
Yeah.
20,000 BC, right? People still fall for it. So there's no cash involved, but there is a crime that's generated a financial benefit for the criminal. And that could be any crime, corruption, which we've mentioned, fraud, it can be people trafficking, drugs, So you separate out or think of any crime that can generate a financial benefit. And then the money laundering part is the bit that basically says, right, we've got this crypto or cash, or it could be a credit balance in a bank account. How are we going to make that appear to be genuine? And then, as you said, there are so many cool ways to do that. I mean, if it's a cash-based thing, then the natural thing is to go through, we call it a front company, like, you saw in Breaking Bad and shows like that, Ozarks, where you put the cash in and you pay it in alongside genuine takings. That's a great way to do
Car
it,
wash.
but
Yeah.
not
Car wash.
always.
Way to go.
Yeah, exactly. But also, with lots of businesses, particularly these days, don't actually produce anything that's that can be inventorized, right? You don't have warehouses full of stuff. You've got people doing business services, people doing IT services, consultancy. People will pay money for these things. It's a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. And that's a great way to launder money when you think about it, because if you can set up some fake companies that you own or control, or preferably that are owned and controlled by people that you control, but nobody knows that you control
Right.
them, right? We
Right.
call them fronts. those companies can be invoicing each other for non-existent services, and the bank that is receiving and sending the money, the banks that are receiving and sending the money, they have no idea because they don't turn up at the office and check, how many staff your turnover was 30 million last year. Yet there's only one person working in the office half a day a week, right? They don't turn up and check those types of things. So you can have those types of things, which really goes under the radar because nobody's geared up to check. So you said about people who yeah, how could it be relevant to them? I mean, there are all sorts of these companies over the world where people go to work in them every day, and they have no idea that the company that they're working for is criminally owned. It may be on one end of the extreme, it may be a genuine company that has genuine business, okay, but there's other stuff coming in that then that they don't really see. Or it might be virtually fake, and you're just a secretary there who's like typing out emails or something. So what would people look out for? I mean, it gets quite subtle, but I mean, if you work in a place and there are customers that you don't know who they are or what they do. You don't know why they want to use the services. Maybe if you work in accounts and you see that this is forming an increasingly large part of the company's business. If you see people coming in with bags and you don't know what's in the bags, and they come and they collect them and they drop them off, and they collect them and they drop them off. If you see purchasers or vendors where the company is paying for a service or for some IT or from software, but you never met the people, you don't know what the software is, you don't know why the company is buying it. Because remember, what you're trying to do, these companies, is get money into the bank account, supposedly from customers, people to whom you're selling services, and then you've got to get the money out by buying services from somebody else. And if those services are fake, right, you've achieved it because it just looks like ordinary business activity. So you get those things. The other thing that you see a lot is businesses where it's simply not just difficult, but impossible to find out who owns and controls them. You've got a business here, and then you look into it and you see it's owned by another company. So it's Mike Fallat Limited is the store or the office, with the people who work in it. Mike Fallat is owned by Mike Fallat Holdings Limited. Mike Fallat Holdings Limited is then owned offshore by Cornell Automated Solutions Offshore Limited. Cayman Islands, BVI, you name it. And then you go through, and who are the people that do? Well, they're lawyers, they're local lawyers, so they're kind of nominees. And it goes on and on and on, and you can't find out who the person is. Now, there's nothing illegal about that. If it's Mike Fallat who ultimately owns it, and he's just
Yep.
chosen to do it that way for whatever reason, he doesn't want people to know how wealthy he is, or he's got a vengeful ex-spouse or something. That's there's all sorts of reasons why people might want to have complex structures. If you're a politician and you don't want people to know how wealthy you are, right? There's nothing illegal about it. But of course, those types of structures can be used, and indeed we know are used by criminals to disguise the fact that these operations are for their benefit.
And
So
that
you
makes
see a
me
lot of
think
that.
of since you're a lawyer and you're able to maybe see the laws of a certain jurisdiction, the real smart players in this usually involve different countries and multiple countries at once. And that makes it almost impossible, right? It not maybe impossible, but extremely difficult, and it's a lengthy process to get to the bottom of it, which then there's a calculation that has to be done. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And so are we really
Yes.
going to put all these resources into it to maybe end up in a dead end? So
Yeah.
is that what you've
Yeah.
noticed whenever it comes to I mean, counterterrorists in general, but multiple countries. You've noticed that. And like you said, everything looks legit, but both players, it has to be both players are actually being dirty. So
Yeah.
is that part of the game?
No, you're absolutely right. That is something that is exploited. You know, we don't have a world government, and we don't have a world, anti-crime or anti-money laundering body. I mean, Interpol and things like that are simply collaborative, and they do a great job. But I mean, their powers are very limited. They don't, they simply coordinate between police forces. It is all on a national basis. And of course, a sophisticated criminal organization will exploit that. And what you find with what are called TNCs, so transnational criminal organizations, is that crimes will be committed in one place. Then they'll be laundered in other places, and the benefits will be enjoyed in other places,
Another
and so they're
countries.
not just
These are not
splitting it.
cities. These are countries, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and so it's not just that they use different countries and commit crimes and do the laundering in different countries, but within a particular country, when it comes to the laundering, they will use different organizations, different financial institutions, because they know that generally banking secrecy historically has prevented banks from sharing information with each other, or indeed with law enforcement, about the transactions that are going on inside their accounts. Now that's starting to change, and you've got one of the big moves within the sector is to try to get collaboration and cooperation automatically, the automatic exchange of information between financial institutions. So, for example, right, going back to your watcher who works in, a company or in a bank, say, and you have, a customer. It's a legal entity. It's a business, and you've seen that the amount that of its turnover is increasing, not dramatically so that it becomes suspicious, but it's going up, and you see that two of its biggest customers are A limited and B limited, right? Now you have no real way, without involving the police and getting document production orders and all this kind of stuff, of getting access to that information. But what we will see going forward is that the bank will be able to contact the bank for those customers A and B limited, and say, well, what can you tell us, about your customers? Because we see that ours, who we're starting to get a bit suspicious about, maybe that these are the two biggest customers, and we've seen the amount of revenue from them come up, by 300% over the last 200. And then they'll say, yeah, well, we see that, and you can spread. So that is one of the ways. One of the more difficult areas is police cooperation, because now I don't have a law enforcement background, but clearly I have spoken with and dealt with a lot of law enforcement officers in different countries. Great people, full of admiration for them. But one of the things that they are terrified of is that the investigation that they may have been working for 2 or 3 years or even longer will become compromised, because there'll be a leak from
Oh,
a cop in another country. Now, particularly if the country is known for corruption. I mean, there's corruption in every country, right? But you so the sharing of information at a law enforcement level can be difficult. I mean, they call them turf issues, but basically, if I tell you who my source is, how do I know that you're not going to be paid by someone who's in your country, who's in hot to the guy that I'm trying to get, and my whole investigation gets blown, and suddenly everybody disappears. So these are difficult issues to resolve, but we kind of have to find a way to do it, because the amounts that are being laundered and the crimes that are being committed just seem to be going up and up, despite all the money that's being spent on it.
what
You know,
usually tips people off to do the investigation? is there some type of victim that comes forward, or is there some way that somebody gets caught and then they, they're basically leveraged to go up to the bigger names, or is it based off of just suspicious activity? Something seems weird here in this area. So let me put together a group and then let's do some digging and see how far we get, how fast we are able to get some answers. What usually
Yeah, I
does
mean,
it?
it can be anything. Obviously, with fraud, you will have a victim, and that victim is going to be pretty mad, as we've seen with various fraud cases over the years, going back to Bernie Madoff and then the crypto stuff and FTX and all of that stuff. So that obviously leads the police to a complaint is filed, and then the police have a legal duty to investigate it, and they start knocking on doors and speaking to banks and so on. So sometimes it comes around that way. When you look when it comes to, not all crimes um, have an obvious victim. I mean, corruption, for example, is, I think, incorrectly, but is often called a victimless crime. I mean, if you pay me a bribe to win a contract, which is a criminal offense, and I take the bribe and give you the contract, which is also a criminal offense, who's lost out? Well,
Right. Yeah.
society generally is lost out, but you don't, unlike a fraud or someone who's just been robbed, you don't have someone rubbing their head or looking at their empty bank balance and saying, I've been had. So you need to look for other ways, and likewise with drugs. You've got willing suppliers and willing users, right? So you have to look for other ways. So when it comes to the sort of anti-money laundering bit, I made a distinction, didn't I, between the crimes that generate uh, criminal money and the actual laundering process. The method that's used there is to put obligations, legal obligations, on pain of jail, believe it or not, on people who work in certain organizations like banks, insurance companies, law firms, accounting firms, real estate firms. You've just had some new legislation in the States on that. That basically, it's pretty blunt, but it basically says, if you see something that's not right, if you see something that is, suspicious, then you have a legal obligation to report it internally to your sort of compliance people, and then they have a legal duty to report it to what's called the Financial Intelligence Unit. It's a unit of the government, FinCEN in the States. I mean, National Crime Agency here, various ones, who then have to decide whether to launch an investigation. So yeah, you're right. So it's both. It can be the victim, the going forward, but there are legal duties on these organizations that I mentioned for people who work in those to report suspicions, and then it works forward. And then clearly, what they then have to know is, when should I be suspicious? What does suspicion look like? And then there's a whole load of stuff around that people have to get trained in so that they become aware of what they're looking for. But the outcomes are not good, Mike, in terms of preventing the money laundering. It seems to be going up. I
Wow.
mean, and I often, if you treat money laundering as a sort of you know social evil, which I guess it would count,
Yeah.
as, and then you compare it to other social evils that have had similar amounts of government attention around the world for trying to solve them, then you really see the I hate to call it this, but the failure over the last 30 years. I mean, I'll just give you one, if I can, which I think is quite instructive. Very sort of simple example. Take drink driving.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the UK in 1967, when we had our first breathalyzer laws, where the cops could pull you over, and if you were blowing at the bag, and if you were over the limit, they could jail you, they could confiscate your car, etc. Now, that was in 1967, so kind of before my time, really. But at that time, there were 1 million cars on the roads of Britain, tiny. And there were, I think, 8,000 road deaths in that year. In just a few years ago, 2018, I think it was, there were 30 million cars on the road and 1,500 road deaths.
Wow.
Now, so that's over 30 years. You've seen, or 60 years, you've seen, a combination of law. It's a criminal offense to drink drive. Technology, blow into the bag, ABS braking, seatbelts. Government, prosecutors, special, drink drive partnerships. You've had campaigns, public campaigns to educate people. All these things have been used, and the result has been good. It's been the cars
Major
have
emphasis
increased,
on it. Yeah, of course.
but we've done exactly the same things with financial crime. We've put technology in place, systems within banks. We've had criminal offenses. You've got to report it. You go to jail if you don't report it. We've got government structures, regulation, all the types of things that you use. We've applied it, but the amount keeps going up. So something isn't working. And what I see, now in government level and also within the financial community is a conversation developing about what have we done wrong and how can we switch this? So because it's become an industry, it's become, rather than if you go to work in a law firm or a bank or in a an accountancy firm or an estate agent or any of these people, these companies that have these obligations, you're not really concerned about preventing money laundering or helping to fight crime. You are concerned about not being nailed by your regulator. So the job has become about avoiding fines and penalties and doing the things that you need to do to avoid being fined, rather than focused on, well, how do I catch these people out in doing what they're doing? And you just see, the fines get ridiculous. I mean, some of the banks, the US has a huge record of fining, but more fines for greater amounts in the US than anywhere else. I think the UK is next, and there's some other countries, but they're billions, they're tens of billions sometimes, but still the the money laundering keeps getting higher and higher. So that's the issue. How can we become more successful? Because we're not being very successful at the moment.
And it might be because many of them are complicit. You don't know, right? There's a reason why some of them turn their heads. And to me, it's becoming more obvious that, there a lot of people are on the take. And so why would they want to stop the gravy train, right?
Well, you raise a good point there, and also when it says when you say sort of complicit, complicit is a big word, isn't it? Because it can mean everything from, on the one hand, someone is a criminal, say in government or in a large organization, they know what's going on, they're being paid to do nothing,
Right.
and they just let it go on, right? But it can go right through to, particularly in the financial sector, what one of the academics has called a criminogenic organization. So a criminal organization is one which is owned and controlled by criminals, and the people who run it are actually have criminal intent, and they are involved in doing what they're doing, and et cetera, right? A criminogenic company is something less than that. So that might be, for example, and I want to make clear, I'm not accusing all banks of being like this, right? I think there are many, banks with senior executives, chief executives, management, C-suite people who are thoroughly committed to all of this. But a criminogenic, a hypothetical example would be an organization which is not criminal in the sense that it's not owned and run by criminals, but it's an organization where targets, financial targets for the shareholders are set at levels which are effectively very difficult or even impossible to achieve without taking huge risks or even breaking the law. Right. And that is projected down into the staff and particularly the sales teams of those organizations. You have to hit your targets. And you do. If you work in private sector, you've got to hit your targets, right? Everybody understands that. If so these then so when you say that to somebody, that can mean different things to different people. Some people will say, well, I'll do it, but I'm not going to break the law to do it. And in those circumstances, you let those people go, right? Because they haven't hit your targets. There's some people who'll say, well, you know what? They seem to be wanting me to, I'm going to break the law and I'll hit my target. So they do that. They ignore the signs. They go in, they provide services to, organizations that they suspect of some kind of criminality. The returns are good. The profits come in. If nothing is discovered and nothing comes to light, that person is handsomely rewarded. And the bonuses are paid out and the shareholders are happy. If that person is discovered and something goes wrong, then the management of the organization will deny all responsibility, accept, express shock and horror of what has happened, point out to the policies, and that person will be hung out to dry.
Yep.
Now that is a thing. I think for sure, to coin a phrase. And that's a problematic area. So, a lot of people are now saying that maybe one of the directions that we need to move in, and it be a bit controversial, but is to say, I mean, I've heard people saying, you know what, we shouldn't bother with any of this regulation. I mean, this is an extreme view. It's probably kind of outside the Overton discussion window of all of this. But there are some people, clever people, who are saying, far cleverer than I, who are saying, you know what, we should get rid of this regulation, right? All these regulations that everyone spends, millions of people working on it, costing, billions and billions of dollars a year. We should just say, if you are the CEO of a bank which is found to have laundered money for, the mob or whoever, you will go to jail. End off.
That's it. That's
For
it.
two years, right? Or 3 years or whatever. I mean, you might have some defenses for that if you can demonstrate 1, 2, 3, 4, but that's it. So that would focus the attention a lot because the CEOs would make absolutely sure. Of course, you would have human rights challenges to that because if you're a CEO and you've genuinely done the best you can and still they'll tell you I can't control everything that goes on in my organization. The human rights with issues, you would probably find a lot less financial innovation.
Yep.
You would probably find a lot more denial of access to financial services, which is a real issue, particularly for poor people and so on, because banks would be too scared to take business
Right.
on.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
they're
so
liable. If
there's
the
no
CEO is
easy
liable,
answer.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no easy answers to it, but we need to find a way because currently what's taking place is not really working in the way that it was intended.
Last question I got for you. When it comes to the countries, you mentioned that there are some more corrupt than others, and I've had people who are absolute experts when it comes to embezzlement. They are able to catch it, but also when it comes to just crime in general in certain countries. Like when I was interviewing a person who has researched China to such a high degree, it explains why crime is so low there whenever it comes to quick trials and the punishment. So I do believe that due to the laws in certain countries, it might be way less prevalent, right? Because of what is in place. So is there maybe a country or two countries, maybe three countries that stand out of maybe the most corrupt that you've seen, or maybe you've heard, or there seems to be a hot pocket of activity?
Yeah. Now, this is, I'll answer the question. I think when you talk about corruption, because there is corruption everywhere. We know that
Of
it
course.
exists. It exists in the United Kingdom, it exists in the States, it exists in France, it exists in OECD countries, and we know that it exists in countries like Russia and Belarus and Ukraine and Iran and China and so on. So it's a global thing. In terms of the worst, I mean, and one strays dangerously close to politics here. But, I don't care. I have a view, so I'll give it. I mean, I would distinguish between uh, um, the kind of corruption that you see in terms of sort of donations and political campaigns, and did the money get used for what it was meant to be used for, and all these things which exist in all countries, including all the ones that I've mentioned. And I would just like to draw a couple of examples where I think you can say that if this is the situation in your country or in the country that you're looking at, then you have not just a corruption issue, but you have a rule of law issue. Now, let's take an example. Let's say that you own a business and you're an honest guy, an honest girl. This is becoming successful, and you've started to make profits, and you've made your first million. Your profit for the year has been a first $1 million, pounds, euros, francs, Swiss francs, whatever it is. So you're starting to feel pretty good. And then you get a knock on the door and somebody comes in. Usually they're in their 60s or 70s. So, they're not here for a fight, right? And they basically say to you, right, we've noticed that your business is doing pretty well. Okay. I represent someone, in the government who you don't need to know who it is. But I'm here to tell you that from now on, 50% of the profits of your business are going to go to this person, and I'll give you the bank accounts. And this isn't to build new roads or, educate children or build another nuclear submarine. This is going straight into their offshore bank account. Okay. So this is what's going to happen. You have the weekend to think about it. If you decide against it, then the police will visit your business on Monday. They will seize all your computers and you will be thrown in jail for tax fraud. Okay. Now that's an example. Now that I don't believe, I may be wrong. I know I don't believe that can happen here in the United. It may happen, but the systems will be such that you will have redress, and in the end, it will be exposed, and the government official will go to jail. I believe that's the case in the United States. Despite all the political corruption and campaign funds, I
I
believe it is
believe
the
that
same in
happens in
France.
Russia and places
I
like
was going to
that.
say it happens in Russia. I think it happens in Iran.
Yeah.
I think it happens in China. It definitely happens in North Korea. I'm dangerously close to spreading out a sort of, right wing version of the evil axis of evil. So I'm not here to say that. All right. Those countries are full of decent people, I believe. But at the end of the day, it's the rule of law. It is lawless in some of those circumstances, right? And if your country is a country where that can happen, and you can be shut out of your own business, or your son gets beaten up celebrating his 18th birthday, the end of his exams, by some coked up son of a local oligarch, and his brain dead, and you're going to have to be feeding him through a tube. And will you get justice? There's some countries where sooner or later it'll say, look, we're going to pay you 100,000 if you're going to carry on like this. We know where your daughter goes to school. She's 15, and there's nothing you can do. You need justice more than food and water, but you won't get it because somebody's connected, and they'll call in the favor of the big guy, and that'll be it. The judge will be bribed or coerced, and you will not get justice. As another example, so there are countries where that can't happen, and there are countries where it
Yep.
is a day-to-day event. And one of the ways I like to distinguish between countries is, you don't be proud of your country, right? Pride spills over into all sorts of horrible things. But if your country isn't one of those where that can happen, be grateful to it.
Yeah, of course.
Be lucky. This is why why do they want to come to the UK or the US? I mean, they don't come to the
There you
UK for the
go.
weather
That is
or
it
the
right
food.
there.
They
That is it.
they want protection from those sorts of things, and it's good people everywhere, right? But it's governments that are bad.
Yeah, and I do believe, I mean, what you're seeing in New York City with Trump, you're starting to see politicians get involved in seizing assets of an individual, and I think that people are looking at that and saying that's not the America that I remember. That only happens in certain countries like Russia. So, it's pretty scary to see maybe some of this transformation, but I believe that people are waking up and hopefully fighting back. But that is
Yeah, it's a
exactly
slippery
what
slope.
It's a slippery slope. Once it happens, if it can happen to one guy, it can happen to you. And then, this beacon of freedom, it goes away. So I'm with you, man. Guys, I think I could talk to you for hours. Maybe we can even talk about documentaries. I get into the Jason Bourne stories that you probably have. But anyways, guys, check out his book.
Fighter.
He has multiple books, but the one that we're talking about today is called Mastering Money Laundering and Counterterrorist Financing: A Compliance Guide for Practitioners. So it's on Amazon. It's doing really well. 4.4 stars for reviews. So pick it up if you are in this world, or if you're curious, and if you want to stay up at
Or if
night,
you're an
not go to sleep.
insomniac.
Or yeah, that's what I'm about to say. I think it's interesting, so it'll keep me up, probably get me all paranoid and worried and all that stuff of, oh my God, this could be happening in my neighbor's apartment right across the way. So, anyways, fascinating stuff. Tim Parkman, is there a website or a social media channel people can find you on in addition to just picking up your book?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I post stuff. And then we our little I shouldn't say little, but software company is called Marker. That's marker-ai.com. It's got all sorts of interesting stuff going on there. And yeah, I think that's where that's where you can find me.
Yeah, I gotta look this up. But anyway, the website again is marker-ai.com, guys. Or
Correct.
look up that website, see what he has to
Yeah.
offer. And real quick, just a quick summary. What is it exactly that you offer?
It's Marker AI is a digital onboarding system. So when you want to open an account at a bank, or use the services of a law firm or whatever, it will help you. It'll help that bank or that law firm to take all your information, but it does a whole load of clever stuff in the background that will help the law firm or the bank or the insurance company, whatever it is, to do what it needs to do to help to fight financial crime.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay. AI, what a buzzword, buzz phrase, I guess you could say nowadays, because holy smokes, it's changing the way everybody's doing business. So you have to understand it, and you have to use it to some degree to protect yourself, because it's not all bad. It can be good. So, guys, pick up his book, check out his website, Tim Parkman. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks a lot, Mike. See you.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to a $1 million life. Right on.